Hi guys. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are so excited to have Laurie Lico Albanese here tonight. So I'm just going to give her a quick introduction before I let her get started. Laurie Lico Albanese has published fiction, poetry, journalism, travel writing, creative nonfiction, and memoirs. Her books include Stolen Beauty, Blue Suburbia, almost a memoir, A Linnell by the Sea, and The Miracles of Prado, co-written with art historian Laura Morowitz. Laurie is married to a publishing executive and is the mother of 2 children. So for this event, she's going to give a quick reading, then a presentation, and then she's going to do a Q&A, and then we're going to have a signing line. So if you haven't purchased a copy already and you wanted to purchase a copy, we do have copies available on the other side. No, I'm just doing that. I'm sorry. And then I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of information about the cards you may have gotten when you walked in. So this fall, we're distributing frequent flyer cards for our events. And here's how it works. For each in-person event you attend by the end of the year, you'll receive a stamp. Attending an event with the best-selling author is a reward in itself, but this fall we're upping the game. Attend 5 events and you'll receive a $5 gift card and an RJ Julia journal. Attend 10 events and you'll receive a $25 gift card and an RJ Julia journal, plus a book lover sticker. And this applies for both in-person events at both our Madison and Middletown stores, as well as an RJ Julia hosted events off the premises. So if you didn't already get a card, make sure you get one on the other side. And don't give an introduction after running up the stairs because it might get a little bit correct. So thank you guys for bearing with me, and I'm now going to pass it off to Laurie to get started.
Thank you. Yay. Hi everyone.
I'm Laurie Lico Albanese. And thank you for having this, what was just a minute ago, a really teeny rainy night. I'm here to talk to you about my novel Hester, which is on the Today Show this morning. I just wanted to mention recommended it as an autumn read, one of her 5 autumn picks. Yeah, so the book's been getting a lot of really wonderful attention, and I'm really happy to just come out and talk to people about it. So what I thought I would do tonight is thought I would give you a reading. I read from the very beginning of the book for about 10 minutes, and then I can just talk you through some of the points about how I did my research and how I created the characters. So for those of you who are not familiar, this novel, oops, looks better without that. This novel is inspired by the Scarlet Letter, and it asks the question, was there a real Hester Prynne? Who was the real Hester Prynne? And what if she could tell her own story? Because of course, Hester doesn't really tell us her own story, right? Nathaniel Hawthorne, the proto-narrator, tells us Hester Prynne's story. At that, I will just begin my reading. This novel, the one thing you need to know for this book is has anyone read it already? Oh, okay. The one thing you need to know, well, we read it and you're here, so that makes me feel very happy. Good. Okay, so there's a note to the reader in the beginning that talks about synesthesia. Synesthesia, is anyone here a person who has synesthesia? Synesthesia is a crossing of your sensory experiences. So you might, for example, smell chocolate when you hear the word pocketbook. Or you may, or Kandinsky, whose paintings were very visual and looked like music, he had synesthesia. So when he heard music, he painted what he saw. So Billie Eilish has synesthesia. They've said Baudelaire, whose poetry is so tangible and sensory, had synesthesia. So in 1829, which is when this novel takes place, nobody really would have known what synesthesia was. My protagonist, Isabel Gamble, who is the model for the Hester Prynne, experiences synesthesia. And that's really all you need to know before I start. So, chapter 1. I'll read just straight through the beginning for about 10 minutes. Salem was meant to be a new beginning, a place where the sharp scent of cinnamon and tea perfumed the air with hope, a place where the colors could be safe and alive in me. I was 19 years old and Nathaniel Hawthorne was 24 when we met on these brick streets. His fingers were ink stained. He was shy but handsome. The year was 1829, and we were each in our own way struggling to be free. He with his notebooks, I with my needle. Some people will tell you that Nat spent the better part of a decade after Bowdoin College alone in his room learning how to write. But that's a fabrication meant for the ages. The true story of how he found his Scarlet Letter and then made it larger than life begins when I was a child in Scotland, and he was a fatherless boy writing poetry that yearned and mourned. Sometimes I still picture him in my mind, a lonely 9-year-old boy with a bad limp and a mop of dark hair, standing at the edge of the Massachusetts Bay, waiting for a ship. He knows that his father has died of yellow fever somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, yet the boy is waiting with pencil at the ready. Something in him knows, I believe this, even after all this time, that although his father will never return, a story just as powerful is coming toward him. It is me, bent into the wind, fleeing home with my colors and my needle and my own set of needs and dreams. It is me, with my red letter, secreted away. Can you hear me okay? Like all the women in my family, I was born in a stone cottage in the town of Abington beside the River Clyde. I had red hair and green blue eyes and was named Isabel for my grandmother, just as my mother was named Margaret for her grandmother. For 200 years, we've been Isabel, Margaret, a chain of women going back and back through time, Ma'am said. And I liked the way it sounded, all of us red-haired girls stitched together like paper dolls. I lived in a world of magic and color then. My mother's voice a sapphire stream flecked with emeralds. My father's a soft caramel. The wind was sometimes fierce pink, and the sound of the waterfall on rocks glistened silver. I didn't know my colors were unusual, and so I never thought to speak of them, just as I never remarked on the air, or the feel of a blanket at night, or the bark of my father's lap that I loved so well. Every year at the summer solstice, we burned a bonfire and danced around the maypole, and in winter we hung mistletoe in the cottage. Pop spoke of fairies who lived beneath may trees, of selkie seals that swam ashore and enchanted the loveborn, and of brave clansmen who died fighting the English. A horse with a shining wet mane is a kelpie come to take you away. Pop's voice spooled like caramel as he shook a warning finger at me. And if you swim in the river and leave your clothes out for the midnight, she'll steal your soul, and that will be the end of you. Don't frighten her, Ma'am scolded, and Pop put up a finger as if to warn me this was our secret. But when we walked together looking for mushrooms in the spring, he spoke of sprites in white dresses who sat beside the river to wash the clothes of the dead, and of an unlucky lad who had stumbled upon one and drowned the following day. Mom grew tight-lipped when Pap spoke of magical creatures and mysteries beyond God, but I knew by the gentle way my mother trimmed his beard and by the way Pap held her at the waist when they danced round the bonfire that theirs was a love bond and that it would protect me. Their stories protected me too. I was my mother's first child. 5 years later, my brother Jamie came. While she was caring for him, Mom said it was time for my first sampler. She showed me how to make my letters first on a slate with chalk and then with needle and thread. One day you'll learn to read. Mom squinted at a line of letters she'd made and the rougher ones I'd traced out beneath them. I didn't get far, but you, Isabel, will read books. I experimented with a thimble made of seal bone, then settled on a plain tin thimble that fit my small finger. Tongue between my teeth, I worked carefully. When I fumbled and pushed the needle beneath my fingernail, I never cried out. Young though I was full of obedient determination. I was preparing a green thread for the letter D when Ma'am came up behind me. What have you done? Her angry voice washed over me like soft blueberries and blackberries. Is it wrong? I studied my work. It was neat and straight. I gave you black thread to make the letters in black. But A is red, I said quietly. Like the colors in the wind and the hue of my mother's voice, this had come to me without intention or fanfare. Blue, B is blue, C is yellow. No, they're not. My mother slapped my knuckles with her tambour hook. The blow was hard and tears stung my eyes. She'd never struck me before. Never say that. Her words flashed in blue-black bolts, and I saw the whites of her eyes. She wasn't only angry, she was afraid. They'll call you crazy or say you're a witch. They'll say the devil has taken hold of you and they'll want to burn it out of you. Do you hear? I'd heard whispered stories of witches hanged and burned in the fields, of men and women who did not defend against the devil and then found themselves full of evil and spite. Witches were spoken of in the past, but evil, insanity, and death were as plausible to me as Pap's silky seals and deadly kelpie seahorses come to take away the living. Isabel, do you understand? I nodded wordlessly, but my mother shook me by the shoulders so hard my teeth rattled. She meant for me to be afraid. You must defend against it, Isabel. You must pray and be strong. Promise me. Yes, ma'am, I promise. Mom and I prayed together that night, but she didn't speak of the colors again, nor did I. After that, my mother gave me black thread, I used black. If she asked for red, I used red. I told myself there were no colors in voices or letters, and I refused my reading lessons, for the letters weren't white on black slate, but a rainbow of colors that I knew were wrong. Mom seemed to understand and didn't push me further. But even as I kept silent, the colors became more vivid and my dreams wilder. Whether the colors were good or ill, witchcraft or the devil, I had no power to stop them. So that's Isabel, our narrator. And so what I thought I would do is take you through a little bit of the story, take a little bit of more of a deep dive. And for that, I have some visuals. So I'm just going to move over here, right? So the premise, as I said, the premise of the novel is easy. Is who was the real Hester Prynne, and what if she could tell her own story? So how did this idea come to me? Well, first of all, I was walking in the park with my husband, and I was like, what if there was a real Hester Prynne, and what if I heard the novel of her real story? So Hester is inspired by the Scarlet Letter, and the Scarlet Letter is America's first historical novel. That is really where I came to the idea. Is I was thinking about the history and women's historical fiction, and I just thought, okay, I did some research, I studied it, and I realized, okay, our original historical novel is actually the Scarlet Letter, and that makes Hester Prynne our original feminist, historical feminist, or proto-feminist protagonist or hero. And of course, the Scarlet Letter was published in 1850, but it takes place in Puritan New England, right? And of course, for those who don't remember, I'm sure everyone remembers, but Hester is forced to wear the scarlet A. It's been said to me that I should make sure I mention that in my talks for those people who don't remember. So sometimes I feel like that's silly, but so as I said, Hester is America's first historical feminist protagonist. She's a really critical character. She's kind of an iconic touchstone to us, right? She's our American Eve. She's scorned and punished for her passion. She's a defiant single mother, but she never really, she doesn't really have a voice of her own. She wears her scarlet A, not like as a badge of shame, but as a badge of courage. But still, everything that she says is pretty much filtered through the men who are judging her, filtered, if you remember reading the Scarlet Letter, the narrator is a proto-Nathaniel Hawthorne who says that he found an embroidered scarlet letter behind a brick in the custom house where he worked, and that that was just something he did a lot. He pretended he was inventing a story from an artifact. But oh boy, this is like a crazy place to stand. Hester has no voice, right? As I said, everything she says and everything she thinks and does is filtered through our male narrator. Scholars have actually wondered for
hundreds of years since the Scarlet Letter was first published, who inspired Nathaniel Hawthorne to create her. It's been rumored that it was Margaret Fuller, the early American feminist. Also, another interesting tidbit is that Hawthorne's mother was pregnant when she married, and so there's the idea that he carried some guilt about that. One thing that scholars all agree on is that Hawthorne did carry a lot of guilt. And so I thought, well, there's an opportunity right there. You know, I'm not saying this is clearly fiction, but I wanted to, as somebody who writes about real people, and I was taking on, granted, I was taking on pretty big, you know, Nathaniel Hawthorne, a pretty big dead white male author. I wanted it to be a real conversation with the novel and with the creation of it as well as I could place it. Does anyone have any questions right now? Or you want to save them for the end? We're saving for the end. Okay. So, of course, I'm going to write this book. I'm going to invent the real Hester Prynne. I decide very quickly that I really don't want to set it in Puritan New England because, first of all, Hawthorne did that. That would just be kind of imitating what he'd already done. And secondly, it's not a great time period. You know, why not do something a little more interesting? So 1829, Hawthorne has just graduated from college. You can see by the middle one, he was kind of good looking, you know, and I've made him, you know, charming in the novel. So he was born on July 4th, 1804. He graduated from Bowdoin College in 1825. While he was away at college, sometimes he got in trouble for drinking and gambling. So he was a shy guy, but he was not a good, you know, goody boy. He was a mediocre student. And a famous quote of his that he wrote in a letter to a friend once when he was older is, "In the depths of every heart, there is a tomb and a dungeon." So he was, you know, he was a little on the dark side, right? But I thought that was opportunity for me. Another thing about Hawthorne is that his great-great-grandfather, John Hathorne, was a magistrate in the Salem witch trials. He was the only one who never recanted, even after they eliminated, they absolved the courts and they pardoned the women, you know, posthumously or whatever. John Hathorne said, no, they were witches. And so he's the only one who never recanted. So while Sarah Osborne, one of the women who was condemned in that court on which John Hathorne's father sat, great-great-grandfather sat, she said, "From the gallows, I'm no more a witch than you are a wizard. And if you take away my life, God will give you blood to drink." So if you remember it all in the Blythedale Romance, which is the book he wrote after the Scarlet Letter, that curse is part of the plot point in that book. And in fact, in my book, I have a woman from the 1600s echoing that, but in Scotland, where she says, yay, she's accused of witchcraft, and she said, "Yes, I am what you say I am." And what the heck does she say? Okay, I'm gonna have to find it. Yay, I am what you say I am. And if you kill me, hell will reign on earth. So so there's like a whole witchy thing going on in the book. And why not? Hawthorne was, you know, this is something, you know, he was a son of Salem, and we know Salem has its own complicated relationship to the witch trials and to the history of the witch trials, which is October. They're teeming with, you know, tourists. I'm going there. I'm very happy to be going there in October to talk about the book. But, you know, it was a travesty, you know, and they sort of try to always straddle that. So I was considering that when I was conceiving of the book. So Hawthorne went to Bowdoin College. He was a mediocre student. I already said that. After he graduates college, he goes home to Salem, where he decides he wants to be a writer, and he spends 10 years alone in his room learning how to write. So I showed you that picture. He was kind of a good-looking guy. He was a card player. The one thing they did talk about, literally all the biographers talk about this. Brenda Wineapple wrote a really good biography of him, and they all say the same thing. 10 years alone in his room learning how to write when he was like, 20 to 30 years old. Only he did go out walking alone at night. He walked for hours alone at night. So now I have some possibility. I have some impetus. And by the way, there was some plausibility as well, because Hawthorne's 5 known novels, all of them are inspired by real life events for him. His first one is a college novel that he published anonymously called Fanshawe, sort of takes place in college, like where he went to school. Then the Blithedale Romance connects back to his great-great-grandfather. All of his 5 novels can be connected exactly to something in his life or his ancestors' life, except for the Scarlet Letter. And that also seemed to me as an opportunity. Why? Why all the others? He was a historical novelist. He spent a lot of time. So I decided to, of course, it's an illicit love story. And why not have our boy, Nathaniel Hawthorne, be the lover? So at that point, I did a lot of research. I started looking at what was Salem in 1829. I found out that Salem in 1829 was an incredible international port city. It was home to the wealthy, before the War of 1812, it was home to the wealthiest men in the world. And that there were a lot of people from, it was East meets West right there in Salem. So it was not, I think a lot of times, this is why I like to read and to write historical fiction, because a lot of times we think, oh, that was the past. Oh, that was the dark past. But I mean, this was a teeming international city. It was wealthy. They were wearing silks. Oh, so I went to Salem. I did my research. That right there is actually a picture. That would be me and my sister who just walked in the back of the room. We were standing here, and it's a terrible picture, but I put it in the presentation so I can tell you the story, which is we were standing here and it's John Hathorne's grave and William Hathorne's grave. And I said, they were terrible men. And at that point, I swear to you, the wind whipped up out of nowhere and the leaves started blowing around. You can ask Donna, she's nodding in the back. So, I felt like I got, good input from the universe. So, of course, you remember Hester Prynne is a needle worker, right? She's an embroiderer. An interesting thing about Hester Prynne is that she's canceled. She's kicked out. She's given this badge of shame, but all the women in town keep going to her for her embroidery. So I had to really think about what that meant. She has this great skill, but every single woman from nobility to the simplest farm woman knew how to use a needle. They knew how to embroider, right? So I started thinking, I did a lot of research, and actually this book, that's a book on the right, Painted with Thread, that had a lot of beautiful stuff from the Peabody Essex Museum. And I started to add, that was really fun because my character does a lot of embroidery in the book. And of course, it's influenced by her synesthesia. And so I did a lot of research into dressmaking and embroidery. And what happened was when I was reading the Scarlet Letter and I was asking myself, as I was saying, why did all these women come to cancel Hester Prynne? Oh, she must have had a great, extraordinary gift. Maybe she had synesthesia, I thought, right? And I tried it out on my character. Oh, sorry. I tried it out on my character and I did some research into synesthesia, and I realized there is a very strong connection between synesthesia and creativity. So one of the things I was able to do with that also, I started playing around in this magical world. As you heard from when I did my original reading, I gave my Isabel Gamble, the woman who has this romantic affair with Nathaniel Hawthorne, I gave her a Scottish background that is connected to a witchcraft legacy of her own, which is at the same time we had the Salem witch trials in America, we had, that came over from England and Germany and Scotland. So there was a woman in real history named Isabel Gowdy. And she's the one I have her screaming, if you kill me, hell will reign on earth. And I have my Isabel descended from her. So the woman who has the love affair with Nathaniel Hawthorne is descended from a woman accused of witchcraft, at the same time that Nathaniel Hawthorne is descended from a man who accused women of witchcraft. And so I did a lot with the magic and the possibility in that. And I had a lot of fun with that as well, with the question of, what is magic? What is creativity? Where does it come from? You know, if you think there's no magic, there's probably no magic. Maybe if you think if you think there's no spiritual world, maybe you'll never feel it, right? But if you think there is, maybe you will. And that's one of the things that I was exploring, if you will. Also, this idea of Isabel's synesthesia being her greatest gift, but it's also a curse, right? And I think that's really something that was fun for me to explore in a character. We can all know, you know, how what we think of as our strongest attribute can sometimes feel also like a problem. You know, the thing you loved that about me, you say to your friend or spouse, you know, 20 years later, and they're like, well, I love it about you, but so, you know, what is a blessing is a curse is a blessing. And I had a lot of fun exploring that. So one other aspect in the novel is that when you read a Nathaniel Hawthorne book, Little Women, a book set in New England at around that time period, you would think there was never a person of color in the story. But in fact, there had been slaves in New England, of course, and the first American slave ship was built in Marblehead and sailed out of Salem in the 17th century. So I have a subplot that involves Hamilton Hall, which is a big hall in the novel, and it's a big hall in Salem. And this family that you see here, John Remond, who's the upper right, he was a free Black man, and they were very prosperous people in Salem in Hawthorne's time period. And their children, who are the ones down below, became active abolitionists. So I wanted to make sure that I included that sort of multicultural aspect. You know, there's a responsibility, I feel, when you're taking on something that was written hundreds of years ago to really, I was doing it with, it's tricky, you're doing it with a 21st century lens. You can't correct the record, but you can open the, you can open the prism. You can open the lens to see what else was there, which is Hester telling her own story, which is that there were in fact Black people there, and so on. So let's see if this plays, because, she comes over on a ship, but what I have here in this corner, and it may not play, is, did anyone listen to the audio or an excerpt?
Oh my God.
Thank you. Yes, she's unbelievable. So this is a little excerpt from the audio. Oh, shoot.
If you get the choice, read it as an audio over the actual.
Wait, where's the where's your volume? Sorry. Oh my God, I'm sure I'm gonna kill myself here. Let's see.
He was shy, but handsome. The year was 1829, and we were each in our own way struggling to be free. He with his notebooks, I with my needle.
Let's see.
Some people will tell you that Nat spent the better part of a decade after Bowdoin College, alone in his room, learning how to write. But that is a fact.
This is the end of the talk. I just thought you should hear her voice.
All right, it's not giving me an option to play it somewhere.
Okay, that's okay. Just play it as loud as we can. Okay. It's very short.
Fabrication meant for the.
It's the opening lines that I read to you. And if you noticed, I did a little accent when I was reading Mother and Father. I got it from her.
Salem was meant to be a new beginning.
Victoria.
A place where the sharp scent of cinnamon and tea perfumed the air with hope. A place where the colours could be safe and alive in me. I was 19 years old, and Nathaniel Hawthorne was 24 when we met on those brick streets. His fingers were ink-stained. He was shy but handsome. The year was 1829, and we were each in our own way struggling to be free. He with his notebooks, I with my needle. Some people will tell you that Nat spent the better part of a decade after Bowdoin College, alone in his room, learning how to write. But that is a fabrication meant for the ages. The true story of how he found his Scarlet Letter, and then made it larger than life, begins when I was a child in Scotland, and he was a fatherless boy writing poetry that yearned and mourned.
So thank you.
It was a witchy book.
Yeah.
Word.
Inspired
I
by,
wish it was.
yeah,
I wish
right.
it was real. Like I'm reading
Yeah.
this and I'm like, why can't this be his real?
I don't know, isn't there a real Holden Caulfield somewhere? I mean, I think I'm certain. You know, she became real to me, right? She did. You know, I don't think I channeled a real human being, but I do believe after I did the whole book, I believe that he had a lover. I just do believe it. Why wouldn't it be true? But it's fiction. I'm not here as a journalist. I'm here as a novelist. So, you know,
Well, then you're not even thinking this is historical fiction, it's just.
no, it's historical fiction because it's set in 1829.
Okay, and the people, at least one actually existed.
Yes, but it's not nonfiction. Because
Right, exactly.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
no,
I would think it would be, I'm with you, I would want it to be, I'll go along thinking that that's his life and nobody can talk me out of it, probably.
right, yeah, well, that is sometimes the danger with historical fiction, or if anyone wants to take the other position because you're a historian, I'm happy to have that conversation.
Word for word.
Word.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun, you know, because the thing is, what we know for sure is that he didn't leave any record. What we know for sure is that when he wrote the novel, he wrote it in like his wife said he wrote it in a white heat. He left, like a couple of months. He left no manuscript pages, no journal entries about it. And when his wife, Sophia, finished reading his manuscript, she closed it up, burst into tears, ran upstairs with migraine and stayed there for 3 days. And I was like, okay, what's that about? You know, so, yeah. Are you doing some historical research back there?
Yes,
Is it proving me accurate or inaccurate?
pretty accurate.
Okay, thank God. What'd you find? Sorry. You didn't know you were coming to like partly stand-up comedy.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I just think it's an interesting concept that
Right.
we were actually looking to see if there's anything else you're writing.
Oh, thank you. I'm writing about Margaret Fuller because did I say that I wanted her to be the inspiration, and I worked for a year on a manuscript where I thought Margaret Fuller would have been the inspiration and would have had a love affair with Nathaniel Hawthorne. And I did a lot of work. She wrote voluminous things, but I just couldn't make them get into bed together. And I spent like a month just like, oh, no, I'll be able to do this. I'll be able to do it. And like this, I couldn't. So then I had this sort of red-headed Scottish woman, perhaps inspired a little bit by Outlander, floating around in my head. And I just opened the door to her and she kind of stepped in. And, you know, as a writer, I worked for a long time with writing hundreds of pages that I thought I might throw away. But you can't really ever throw anything away because it's on the cloud. And so now I'm using that to write my next book, which I'm sending to my editor like really soon. So, yeah. Yeah.
What's your research process like? How do you go about things?
So she asked, Nora asked, what's my research process like? So, messy, Nora, messy, but it's kind of also very enormous. Like I can read anything and anything. I read a lot of scholarly stuff because like when I was telling you that it's a mystery, that it's been a literary mystery who inspired him to write, who inspired the Hester Prynne character. That's true. I read a lot of stuff going back all the way to, you know, the 1870s when they were doing, you know, scholarly responses to the work. I also read something I really love doing is I found the online, what is it called? Like the online files from the Salem Gazette, which was a weekly or twice weekly newspaper. And I downloaded them all and I printed a lot. And that's how I found out like what would be selling in stores, what the names of ships would be, how the shipping industry would work. So that was a lot of fun. I had to research a lot of different things. I had to research what would the climate of in Salem be in 1829, but I also did a lot of research because there are these tiny little snapshots into the 17th century. So I researched witchcraft, a lot of reading. The internet makes it very, very much more amenable, but I also went to Salem because in the end, you really have to be able to make your character walk down the street. And I really love that. I love that New England preserves its history so that you can go back and look.
Did you go to the museum and hear the talk?
The witch talk?
The witch museum talk?
I didn't go to the
Oh my
witch
God.
museum.
I still, and it was probably 30 years ago or 25 years ago that I went. But it always stays with me when they're trying to get the guy to confess.
The pressing.
Yes,
The pressing on
and they
him.
kept putting, you know, they were pressing him and putting rocks on him. And
Yeah.
they say, "What say you, John Burroughs?" He goes, "More weight."
Right.
And that just has stayed with me. I don't remember anything else except Hezbollah,
Yeah.
what her name was. Yeah, something like that.
Tituba? Or I don't know if that's
Oh, maybe it is Tituba.
But you know, the thing about the witch trials was here and elsewhere. If you were accused of being a witch and you admitted you were a witch, they let you live. Yes, I am a witch. That's why I have my character say, yeah, I'm a witch. Because if you said, no, I'm not, the woman who was screaming, no, I'm not, was screaming it from the gallows, right? And so it's still interesting, you know, women are still accused of being witches today, literally not, you know, here, hopefully in America, but in all over the world, women are accused and stoned. You can be stoned to death for being accused. And once you're accused of being a witch, it's very hard to defend against it, right? And also, by the way, witch accusations often were against widows, older women. It was a land grab. Oh, if I accused you of being a witch, the town could then repossess your land.
Did you read The Witch of Bloodborne?
I didn't, but I did a lot of research. I put it on my
Because it's about Weathersfield, Connecticut, and the witch was an old woman who lived by herself down in by the river.
right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And you know, also, by the way, women who were midwives, if you were healers, all that. Yeah. What's it called? The
Witch of Blackbird Pond by Elizabeth George Spears.
Okay.
It's actually a children's.
Yeah, it is. It is. But
They're sixth grade.
yes,
Okay, that means I can read it easily.
Right.
Children's books are really good research.
yes.
They're really good because
But it's not written down to children
Okay.
at all. It's just a good introduction. In fact, the person that when I first moved to Connecticut from California, a person was doing graduate work on presenting a book, and that's what he did, and that's because it was Weathersfield and he lived in Weathersfield.
Huh, cool.
And it's it really is a sweet story.
Okay. So it doesn't end horrifying.
No,
Okay. Plot spoiler.
there's some parts of it that you're not sure which way it's gonna go, but
Right. I like Catherine Howe's books, the
yes, I've read those too.
Physic,
Yes,
the Daughters of Temperance Dane and the Book of
Yes.
Physic. I read those.
yeah.
Yeah. Those were fun. And she's descended from someone accused of, I think she might be descended on both sides, because a lot of people in Salem are, because people couldn't leave. They didn't leave, they stayed. You couldn't really leave a town if you didn't have any money, and you couldn't leave a town in New England unless another town would take you in. I mean, you could go live in the wilderness or something, but the churches kind of control the towns. And so if you wanted to leave, you'd have to apply to another parish and the minister would have to approve you. And what minister would approve you if you had, your sister had just been, you know, or your mother or your wife had just been hanged for witchcraft? So they stayed. And then they ended up marrying each other decades later. But this book is also sexy. Let's just end on that. I don't want to end on the darkest of
All right, well, time-wise, that really brings us to a perfect ending.
Okay, cool.
All right, so thank you guys so much for joining us, and thank you again to Laurie for being here.
Thank you.